I'm lecturing at the local university, and I'm teaching a comics course for the first time this year.
Oh, cool.
And our academic year runs from March to October. So we'd just started. We were 3 weeks into the course when the country went into lockdown, and so everything's online now. Yeah.
I'm looking at all the books on your bookshelf now. They're all imported from my country. Yeah.
Well, I have different shelves. So
Oh yeah, I
there's
see.
a shelf near the top, which is New Zealand stuff. But most of the New Zealand books I've taken into my office at the university.
What are the publishers in New Zealand? What are they called?
Sorry? The publishers?
Yeah, who are they?
Well, we haven't had dedicated comics publishers until very recently. The market here is so tiny, and for a long time, comics were something that were imported from the US and the UK, basically. When I was a little kid, it was mostly British comics that were coming in. Beano and well, a whole range. I mean, this is like the 1970s, and the British comics industry was going through a complicated time, but they still had many weekly. They were all weekly comics, and they were printed on newsprint, mostly black and white, with an occasional page with two colors, or as time went on, they added more color, but mostly black and white. And each issue would have 6 or 7 different serials running through it. But it was a weekly comic, so like every Thursday I'd go to the local store and pick up whichever. There was always one weekly comic I was getting every week, and sometimes 2.
What were the storylines? Was it like the Phantom or something, or what?
No, it was. So I started out getting I was obsessed with World War II as a kid, because I feel like it's a generational thing.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, every second thing on television was about World War II. Lots of the comics were about World War II. It was just around us all the time. And so I used to get a British comic called Battle Picture Weekly, which was actually a really good comic. And then the people behind Battle Picture Weekly, the same editor and a lot of the same writers and artists, then started 2000 AD in 1977. So I then started getting that. And there were others. I mean, they did Star-Lord 2000. It was mostly science fiction or war was what I was obsessed with.
Yeah.
There was a really good humor one for a while called Crazy with a K. And it was very much in the British tradition of Beano and so on, but it was heavily influenced by Kurtzman's Mad.
Oh yeah.
And they did lots of trick covers on things, and that was a really, really clever one.
But what was Beano? I mean, I only know about Beano from like seeing images on the internet. Was it actually a good humor publication, or was it not very funny?
I never actually got Beano. I mean, I was Beano, Whizzer and Chips. I was more interested in very dramatic stories. So I got Crazy partly because already this was when I was probably 8 or 9, and I was already aware of Kurtzman's Mad. My dad was into comics, and he would bring home all sorts of interesting things for me. And I remember him bringing home. You remember? I don't know if you know these ones, but there was a time in the 70s when Mad magazine, for about 6 months, they reprinted the Kurtzman Mads as little inserts.
I have those here, yeah.
Great, yeah. So he brought those home for me because he remembered the Kurtzman Mads. So I knew of those, and I was blown away by them. And so when I saw Crazy, I grabbed that because it was clearly, really based on that.
The cartoonists, like, are there any notable cartoonists that worked on Crazy?
I haven't looked at it since I was a kid. I need to go back and find it again. None of this stuff's been reprinted.
Huh.
Yeah, the British, there is a growing reprint industry in the UK. The UK's comics industry kind of collapsed in the 90s.
Hmm.
And it's been gradually reviving, but those weekly comics have almost completely disappeared.
Yeah.
2000 AD is still going, but it's now really expensive, so it's not like kids are buying that in huge numbers.
Is it a magazine or what?
Yeah, it's more like a magazine. But because I was in the UK in the early 90s, and I went over there determined to break into the comics industry, just as it was disintegrating around me. it was perfect timing.
Yeah.
And so it is reviving at the moment, and part of that revival is that there is a growing market for reprints. But the stuff they're reprinting is mostly 2000 AD and
like Judge Dredd kind of stuff, or what?
Yeah, lots and lots of and that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff there.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that I was reading as a kid. But
how about this? How about this reprint? You have this one?
Oh my God! I might have blurbed that book.
Did you? Oh, you might have. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe not in this edition.
No, I helped promote it because Glenn Dakin was one of the biggest inspirations to me when I was in my teens.
Oh, wow, really?
Like 18, 19, when I was starting to send stuff off to magazines overseas.
Yeah, how I found out about him was reading Eddie Campbell's Alec omnibus.
Yeah.
And Glenn Dakin just kept popping up in his stories, and then me and Dakin were doing this or whatever. And I was like, who is that guy? And I looked him up, and then this was like the only collection of his work in America, this top shelf collection. And it's really, it's great, but I'd never heard of it. I don't know. I mean, it's also from like 2006 or something.
Yeah, somewhere I've got a stack of Glenn's mini comics from the late 80s. I think I first came across his stuff in Fox Comics, which was the Australian magazine that I was doing stuff for.
Is that the one that Dan Clowes did a cover for with like the fox on it? Yeah.
Yeah. It was an amazing little magazine. They had obviously a lot of Australian cartoonists. I think I was the only New Zealander. There might have been one or two others that sneaked in now and then. But they also had a whole lot of really great cartoonists from the UK. Glenn Dakin, Ed Pinsent, I think Carol Swain did something for them.
Maybe or not?
Sorry?
Was Phil Elliott in it?
Yeah, I think Phil Elliott did some, and Chris Reynolds. That was where I first came across Chris Reynolds, and that was Chris Reynolds and Glenn Dakin and Ed Pinsent. They set my brain on fire. They was like, now this is the comics I've been looking for all my life.
Do you have that collection that Chris Reynolds one? It's called The New World. Do you have that collection?
That's the New York Review of Comics one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that book. That was probably my favorite book of the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, it's nostalgic for you, right? When you look at that.
Yeah, stuff. Exactly. I mean, there were probably one or two little things in there I hadn't read before, and there's some gaps in there. There's some stuff missing that I wish was there. But so I've got quite a lot of issues of the old Mauritania comics series that Chris did, where a lot of those stories first appeared. But also some of those stories, they were in Fox Comics. They were in Fast Fiction, which was like a zine that group in London put out for a while.
So wait, so you went there to England thinking you were going to try and get into mainstream comics at that time, and then you discovered alternative comics? Or is that how it worked?
No. I was more into alternative comics than I was into mainstream stuff. Like I grew up reading both. I mean, I guess alternative comics didn't exist when I was growing up, but I was reading underground comics.
Yeah.
And I was reading European comics too. So I grew up on a pretty broad diet of comics thanks to my dad. And also Tintin and Asterix in New Zealand are everywhere. Like every public library has the whole set, every school library has the whole set, and probably half the households in the country had them in the 70s too.
Yeah, it's like Peanuts for us, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I also grew up on Peanuts, all the little paperback collections.
Yeah. I've got some of those, like this one right here. Do you have this one?
No, I don't have that one. I don't have, I lost a lot of my childhood books, but I've been slowly rebuying them. I've got a little shelf of, here they are, a little shelf of the Peanuts books up here. Oh, look, I have got it.
You have got it?
Yeah, but with a different cover.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Wait, do you have this one?
This is from Coronet. This is the UK edition.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
New Zealand was part of the. No, hang on. No. We could just screw it out. This would be great fun. No, I haven't got that one. God damn. The thing is, New Zealand was part of the whole world's book industry was divided up into these regions that were zealously guarded, and New Zealand was part of the British market. So it was actually for a while, bookstores in New Zealand couldn't buy American books. It was illegal.
Wow.
Yeah, we had really strict import controls.
So hold on a second. Let's see that copy of Hey Peanuts you have. Let's see if it's the same exact first comic on the first page.
Right.
This is the very first page of the American.
Okay, I colored it in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is one of my childhood ones because I picked up a whole bunch from my mum.
That's the first.
Give me some candy.
Yeah. Same comic.
Yeah. So published. Who's the publisher on that one?
This was a Fawcett Crest book.
Yeah, so this is Coronet Books, which is Hodder Fawcett in London.
Oh, okay, I see.
It's the British. I mean, back then, every publisher in America or Britain, any sizable publisher, they all had all these, they had an American office or a British office, and they had licensing deals. And
here in America, you can go like any thrift store, you can go and find those Peanuts collections, like the Mad collections. They're everywhere. They must have printed like 1 million copies of each one,
Yeah.
So.
What did you grow up reading? I mean, in your autobio comics, there's sort of hints of what you were reading, but
I was reading. Here, I'll show you the kind of comics I was reading. Stuff like this.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of. My household was a superhero comics household, and the only reason that I was exposed to alternative comics or anything self-published was because my older brother at the time was trying to break into comics, and so he went to the comic book shop one time and just bought everything small press that he could find there and brought it home.
Right.
And he was doing that to figure out how he could break into comics, but for me it was exposing all the other weird stuff that was also being published. It was trickling down to me. So I remember all this stuff. I knew Shannon Wheeler. I knew Evan Dorkin. I Milk and Cheese and stuff like that. That was all crap that was just on the floor of my house.
This is what, the 90s?
Yep, this is around 93. Yeah, 93.
That is exactly when I was starting to publish in the US.
Okay, yeah. With Pickle or what? Was that your
Pickle,
first comic?
Yeah. Pickle, which was published by Michel Vrana, Black Eye.
Mm-hmm.
And the first issue was in 92.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, precisely that time. So that was all the stuff that I was surrounded by when I would go. In 94, I went to my first Comic-Con at San Diego with Black Eye. Yeah. And they had this little kind of ghetto at the back, which was all the alternative publishers, the small press publishers.
It's still like that, I think. It's a small ghetto now, though.
The last time I went was 2000. 2000 and, I think it was, it was either 2000, 2001. It might have been 2001, like a month before the September 11 attacks.
Oh, wow.
and it was terrifying. I just found Comic-Con so overwhelming, and it was like a total sensory assault. And I remember because I had two things out at the same time. I had my new series from Drawn and Quarterly, which was Atlas, and I was also doing stuff for DC.
Yeah.
I was doing a Vertigo series, and I remember I had a signing at DC, so I left the Drawn and Quarterly booth to walk over to the DC booth to do my signing, and I got lost. It was like you were having to, squeeze people apart to get through. And it was so huge and so crowded and so noisy. And I was probably clinically depressed at the time anyway. And I just hit this point. It was almost like having a panic attack. And I nearly thought, I just need to get out of here. But then I saw the DC sign and thought, oh shit, I better do it. As soon as my signing there was finished, I fled back to Drawn and Quarterly and never left that booth again. Favorite stuff was always, obviously it was the hanging out with other cartoonists, going out to dinner with a bunch of people, or I remember that Fantagraphics used to do like a beach party.
Whoa.
I don't know if they still do that, but they did a beach party at night, and I remember Ron Reggie Jr. was, I don't know if he was tripping or what, but he went for a swim in his jeans, I think. And I was really worried he was going to drown because it was really dark and he was the only one swimming. And it was one of those beaches with, there were waves. And James Kachalka, I think, just about getting into a fight with Gary Groth. It was like the perfect Fantagraphics evening. It was like, this is everything that I always dreamed it would be like, hanging out with Fantagraphics people.
Well, you almost started working with Fantagraphics a few years ago, right? Your last book?
Yeah, I did way back then, I became friends with a bunch of those people, like Eric, and I would, I'd do stuff occasionally for the Comics Journal, or and Eric he got me to do stuff for a couple of his anthology books. He did a couple of books called Dirty Stories.
Oh yeah, of course.
It was back when Eros was a thing. I was disappointed by it because it was not, as a book, I felt like it wasn't porny enough for me.
Yeah, right.
Come on, guys.
It's comic.
Yeah. It's disgusting. But I had so much fun on my story for that I then went and wrote a 400-page erotic graphic novel that expanded that story, which I've never drawn but really would like to. It's just that when I think 400 pages,
yeah, tell me about it.
No one's going to publish this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I had this plan. Atlas was going to be 1,000 pages long.
What? How many issues? Wasn't that like two issues?
I did 3 issues. I did 3 issues, and then I thought, what am I doing? It's my Underwater.
Yeah. I actually want to finish Underwater for Chester. I have the issues here.
You gonna do a pitch?
Well, I was just thinking, like, I should just
franchise it.
I should just do something. I should just finish this story, take it where I want to go with it, and then also publish it, And I'm sure he'd be totally cool with that, honestly. But I wouldn't even necessarily pitch it as like this is the ending of Underwater. I would just try and make it work as its own thing. But if you've read Underwater, then you understand that it's like a bigger story.
Yeah. When you finish that, you could do big numbers.
Yeah.
My sister, she's among other things a filmmaker, and she was asked years ago to be part of a project that never ended up happening, but it was going to be an exhibition of posters for films that were never made. And so what they did is they asked a whole lot of filmmakers, what's the film that you wish you could make but you never will? And then they commissioned people to do a poster for it.
Yeah.
It was such a great idea for an exhibition, but it the exhibition never happened, so it was
Oh
really
yeah.
perfect.
Is that your studio that you're in, or like a home office or
No,
something?
this is home. I actually I have a studio, a shared studio in town, um,
Yeah.
and also I've got my office at the university. So I feel like I've got way too much space these days.
Are you
Um,
still drawing, or what? How do you working on a new comic series?
yeah, I'm working. I'm always working on half a dozen things,
Hmm.
and then it takes about 10 years for any of them to see print.
Yeah.
Uh, and I can never predict which one's actually going to get finished. I'm just the worst. I'm really bad at working methodically.
What's get finished? Just all of a sudden you get like influenced or like inspired to just work on one of the many projects you have going to finish it.
Um, yeah, the thing is that like both of the long books that I've finished, they started off as little side projects to relax with. Like I was working on something else that was the main serious project. The first time it was a story called Cafe Underground that I was serializing in Pickle, and that was going to be my first graphic novel. I'd written it. I wrote it in 1985, and I had the script all mapped out,
Yeah.
and I was serializing that in Pickle, but I kept making changes to it. There were parts of it I wasn't satisfied with, and the biggest dissatisfaction was the ending. I didn't feel like the ending quite worked, and so as I was working on it, I kept kind of thinking, I've got to rewrite this, I've got to replan it, and I started to lose confidence in it. But while I was doing that in Pickle, I started serializing Hicksville as a little backup story, just for fun, just to really relax. Basically, that was the one that was just purely for the pleasure of it. I didn't even plan it out. I was doing it scene by scene.
Mm.
Uh, and But that's the one that took over. And gradually it grew to take over everything else in Pickle,
Mm.
because it's like Blammo, it was like a one person anthology comic,
Yeah, yeah,
which was like, that was the default form of the early 90s for alternative comics.
I wish it still was. I love that format.
Yeah, I love it too. It's probably my favorite
Mhm.
structure. And it's partly influenced for me by growing up on those British comics, those British weekly comics, and each issue would have 5 different serials. Um, I do love that format. I always felt like in the late 90s, I started writing things to try and lobby the comics industry in this bizarre, deluded sense that anyone was listening. Um, and what I was trying to persuade them to do was to adopt that format,
Mhm.
because floppies were dying out. The industry was in deep shit, and I felt like the format they should use was like the um, manga weeklies or monthlies, and you'd have like you'd have an X-Men monthly,
Mhm.
and it would be 200 pages long, and it would have all the X related stories
Yeah.
serialized in that, and
Uh-huh.
that way you didn't have to, the survival of the magazine didn't depend on that one story.
Yeah.
And you could try things out, and you could try new artists out and all sorts of things without investing a whole lot of money in a book that might fail after 6 issues.
Yeah.
um, it makes so much sense to me. I don't know why.
What did they say when you brought that up?
um, the reactions varied from people just not getting it to the most common response was, oh yeah, that sounds like quite a good idea, but that's too big a shift, because everyone was locked into this business model now of just providing lots of monthly titles to fanboys and comic shops.
Hmm.
Um, and it was no one would be too difficult for anyone to shift from that business model, because it was a complete unknown. You didn't know if that'd work. But I felt like you could sell those in newsstands again.
So when you came out here, when I met you, you were here for like that. I was at CCS at the time. You came to
Yeah.
do a talk there. And then you just toured around the country a little bit, right? And up into Canada.
Yeah, that was a tour for Sam Zabel and the Magic Pen.
Yeah.
With Fantagraphics, and it started at SPX where we did a signing next to each other.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm slightly haunted by that because I was jet lagged to all hell and in a strange state of mind. And I did that signing sitting next to you, and I did not register at all who you were, and you introduced yourself, and I think you gave me a copy of the first Fante Bukowski one.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And I've been kicking myself ever since because it's like if now what I would give to sit next to you for an hour at SPX and
get out of here, you.
I was just so in another world.
Yeah. Well, I remember you going up to CCS maybe like after SPX.
Yeah.
CCS.
That was
right.
Because I went from SPX, I went to New York and did a signing at Desert Island, and then went to CCS, and then God, I can't remember. Then I went to Comics Crossroads, Columbia.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was
a great show, isn't it?
It was an amazing show, and it was so lovely hanging out with Tom and and spending time at the Billy Ireland, and that was the highlight of the whole tour was the Columbus.
And that's where I met Amy. When I lived in Columbus, right after I left CCS, she was working at the museum. And
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, she worked for Caitlin McGurk in the office.
Right.
I was there looking at comics and stuff, and I had like a faraway crush on Amy. And then Caitlin was like, "You should ask her out. You should ask her out." And then I didn't. And then I think Amy asked me out, and then yeah, that was it. That was history.
The rest was history.
Yeah, but I remember she was like saying like, "You should come by the museum and look at some Todd McFarlane art."
See, when you held up that comic that these are the comics I was reading when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And was that like a Todd McFarlane cover or a Rob?
That's Art Adams.
That was Art Adams.
Yeah.
Dang. It had the look of that 90s kind of
everything. Everybody wanted to be Todd McFarlane back then, right?
Yeah, and it's so weird for me. It's when I feel most like an older generation.
Yeah. Is
when I realize there's now a whole generation of really established alternative cartoonists who grew up reading Todd McFarlane. And Todd McFarlane was, by then I was in my 20s, late 20s, and I was, publishing all sorts of stuff. And Todd McFarlane was like the enemy. He was he was everything wrong with mainstream comics.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. Like in my neighborhood, this is so weird to think about now, but like in my neighborhood, all the kids read comics. So like I remember when like Spawn #1 came out, it was like a big deal in my neighborhood. Like Spawn, who's got like everybody had the issue of Spawn, the first issue and stuff, and like it was really exciting. And then he started like making toys, and like every kid in my neighborhood had them, and they would just break really easily. That's what I remember about those things, because they weren't made for kids; they were made for like adult nerds, So like as kids, like we'd get them and then we'd be playing with them, and like the arm would break off. Like, oh no. But they all came with a comic book, And now I can't imagine like any neighborhood kids at all caring about something like that. Like the new comic is out,
Well, I want escapism, but I don't want that escapism.
Here's the escapism I want.
Exactly. That is what I want. And this is the thing. I feel like I haven't been able to get what I want from comics, or even there's not or novels or contemporary films or TV. But that's why one of the reasons that now I mostly watch films that are older than me.
Yeah.
So I'm absolutely addicted to adventure movies and romances and comedies from about 1920 through to, earlier too, but through to about 1960. But the thing is, I grew up, so my dad taught film,
Oh,
And and when I was a kid, nobody taught film in New Zealand. It was the universities did not believe in film being something you'd teach,
oh.
and we had no film industry, and so my dad fought for years to get a film paper at the university, and as soon as he finally did talk them into it, it was the most popular paper in the whole department,
Wow.
which everyone else hated. So basically, he slowly carved a space out for film studies in New Zealand. But what that meant was in the 70s, it was before we even had VHS. You couldn't watch a film on video. And so if he was going to show a film to his students, he had to rent the reels of film, usually on
Oh,
16 mil, and show it on a. So he got trained up as a projectionist, so he could do this.
wow.
And he would often bring home the projector the night before a class and the reels of film, and he'd show it on our living room wall and take notes and make sure there weren't any missing scenes. And so I grew up kind of watching all kinds of shit. European experimental films and really early animation, and right through to, this was like the 70s, so the whole 70s Hollywood new wave, all of that stuff I used to see. He also was involved in running the film festival in New Zealand. So I feel like I spent most of my childhood in a dark room watching some amazing art film.
Yeah.
But what I've been doing since then, that enormously shaped how I approach comics
Mm-hmm.
as well. But
You were just like internalizing storytelling, like as a child, you know?
visual storytelling.
Yeah.
But also, I had this really strong sense that film could do absolutely any kind of story, and with any level of complexity and nuance. And I just felt like, well, so can comics, and even as like a 6-year-old, I kind of had a sense that what I really wanted to do was big, long comics that were like a novel or a really good art film.
Well, you know what? My favorite way of like learning, like the minutia of the past is like reading a book like this, the collection of like, J.R. Williams or whatever. Like, if you're just reading any of these strips, it's like you learn so much just about like daily life.
Yes.
Like a specific period that you just would never get, even from a film. It's just like things about like how a stove, like a specific type of stove, would break down over and over again, and like it's funny. Everybody understands that. It's like now you read it and you're like, I don't understand what is that? I guess that stove had a problem, and people were, it's really interesting. And that's what I love about Gasoline Alley too. And I plan on doing like a video about Gasoline Alley soon, just exploring that, because that is like one of my favorite like time travel strips. You just jump right back into that era. And did you read the new volume yet that came out?
I haven't. No, I did a lecture the other day for my students on a single Gasoline Alley Sunday page, and it wasn't one of the ones that everyone always shows. They're always showing the ones where he breaks the single image up into lots of panels, which are gorgeous. But this one was just a really quiet little strip about Walton Skizix going out into the country to look for pussy willows early in the spring, and they get caught in a rain shower, and then they get back to the car, and that's all that happens. There's like nothing happens in this strip.
Yeah.
Really beautiful. Half the students were like, "This is so boring," and then a few of them were just really fascinated by it. It's like that when you read an old comic, that you're having to climb into the world of people reading this in the 1930s or the 1940s.
Yeah. When I moved to Denver, Colorado, it was like the first, like sort of like Victorian town that I'd ever lived in. I was like 20 years old, 19 or 20, and like that was like the beginning of me doing something that I call like urban archaeology, where like I would just like look at, there'd be like old horse hitching posts, like still in front of some of the houses, and nobody knew what they were, and I'd just be like, you know what that is? Like somebody used to hitch their horse right there. Like what the heck? But I was like so obsessed with that, just like seeing like little details that are left over from the past, like an old segment of like a wrought iron fence that's just there in between like two newer fences. It's just like things that were left over that I just got really fascinated by like looking for those like little pieces all around, and there were so many of them. Now there's less, unfortunately, because they're just basically redoing the entire city. And that was actually when I met John Porcellino, that was like an interest that we both shared about Denver. And we would just walk around like where all like the old West saloons used to be and stuff like that. And you can still see the old paintings on the side of the brick wall. And you're like, look at that, a Lipton tea mural is still there on the side of that building.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like, one of my favorite books of all time is a British history book called The Fields Beneath, and it's a history of one little corner of London, Old Kentish Town, and she tells a social history of it going back to as early as she can. But what she's trying to do is find the traces of that history in the landscape that's still there. Oh. So the introduction is one of the most transcendently beautiful things I've ever read, and she talks in there about how you can walk into the back of, the backyard of a terraced house in Camden, and look down the line of backyards, and you'll see a line of a particular kind of tree trekking right down there in everyone's backyard. That was originally the border of a field. So those trees were planted in the 18th century to border a field, and she tracks which field it was and who owned it. Wow. And how the bricks of the houses were made from the clay that was dug from the very ground where the houses were built. There was a lot of brickworks there in the 19th century when that was going from countryside to a suburb of London. But so the title "The Fields Beneath" comes from something carved over the door of the house where she lives. It's been there. The carving's been there for 100 years, and it's basically that below the city streets, the fields are still there underneath. Wow. But the thing that gets me is, why are so many cartoonists, why are so many alternative cartoonists obsessed with this stuff?
I don't know. Because
it's a thing.
Is it a thing with alternative cartoonists?
Well, a lot of the underground cartoonists were really obsessed with 1920s and 30s stuff, and that continues with people like Chris Ware and.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not really sure I don't know what that's about. Maybe it's because like the glory days of like our craft was back then.
Right.
It's like we're working in a medium that's like obsolete, and we're like, attracted to like the obsolete world. Like one time I was crossing the street in Denver, and the pavement, like the asphalt had like eroded a little bit, like on this one area, and I saw the trolley tracks underneath there poking out of the street. And I was like, holy shit. It was like in the middle of the crosswalk. And I just like was like stopped. All these cars are waiting for me. And I'm like staring at these tracks. And I'm just like, they curve up this way. And I found like an old photo of that street corner. And sure enough, it was the actual trolley tracks. There was a trolley car on there. So it was like they had just covered it with asphalt. They didn't even take them out. And like, just for a moment, like I got to see them coming out, peeking out of the side, out of the asphalt. And it was like such an exciting moment,
One of the comics I'm working on is partly about tracking a river in Auckland, which is where I've lived most of my life. So right in the center of the city, there's a natural spring that bubbled up from the ground, and then the stream ran down from that all the way down to the sea, down a really steep hill. There was a waterfall there that it made. And that's all gone now. Like the spring is still there, and it's now the Auckland University Law School car park building.
Oh, jeez.
And at the back of the car park building, there's this brick wall with halfway up the wall, there's a little alcove,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this water bubbling out, like out of a pipe, and then it runs down into a gutter underneath.
Oh my God.
Spring. That is this natural spring. It's still there. So it's fresh. That's fresh, fresh artesian water coming up from underground, and the river it creates, the stream it creates, is still there, but it's now a storm drain.
Oh man.
And you can actually, even the beach where it used to reach the sea is now a road because they reclaimed a whole of land, and it's a road called Beach Road.
Yeah.
But you can walk it. You can walk the path of the stream if you know. So I was looking at old maps from the 19th century and seeing where it went and where the waterfall was, and then walked it. And the thing is, New Zealand is even like the urban landscape in New Zealand is even more recent than in the US. Mm-hmm. Like we're both colonial countries, where a modern landscape was kind of built on top of an existing human and natural landscape.
Yeah.
But that started in the US, I guess, in the 1500s.
Right.
Here it started in the 1800s.
Oh, okay.
So New Zealand was it was settled by people from around Polynesia about 900 years ago, they think.
Yeah.
So those were the first humans here.
Not very long ago.
No, there have been no humans in New Zealand until quite recently. It
took them a long time to find it.
Yeah, it was mostly birds.
Yeah.
Then.
Well, there was no mammals that are native to New Zealand?
There's a bat. There's a single bat.
Are you kidding me?
the pecker. And that's why in Hicksville there's a reference to that. Rua pecker. Grace's surname is the name of the bat, and the underground, the caves where under the lighthouse where Coupe keeps the library. Mm-hmm. Those caves are called Rua Peka, which means the bat's nest or the bat cave.
Oh, yeah, nice. Good.
No one knows all that. My wife just handed me a note. She said, "I have a theory why cartoonists are so into the old stuff."
What is it?
Because I might have to get her to explain it, but she says because it's narrative and very visual. The city's half-hidden cartoons, so it's like these the narrative of the history is still there visually. You can see it, when you see the faded signs on the side of walls and so on. It's like a half-buried cartoon. So I guess she's saying it's because it's narrative and it's a visual. Is that what you mean, Terry? She's too shy. She's not going to come.
What?
You mean if I talk about ideas?
She's too busy doing work. Yes. Anyway.
Do you ever get offers from mainstream comics to do anything anymore? Or is that was it a specific editor that you were working with there at the time?
Well, my first editor there was Heidi MacDonald. So she was an editor at Vertigo at the time, and she's the one who reached out to me and asked if I'd want to do something. And that's how I ended up writing Hunter, which was the Books of Magic reboot. And I did that for a few years, and then another editor asked me to write Batgirl for a while. I had some other projects that were sort of circulating. Joey Cavalieri was working on something with me when he was an editor there. He was lovely to work with. He did those Bizarro comics collections.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are cool. But you hated working on like that kind of stuff anyway, right? Like, didn't you just want to get back to your own work?
Eventually, well, it was complicated. Yeah. The thing is, I didn't grow up reading superhero comics. Like that was one thing I wasn't really reading much as a kid, except I was reading old Captain Marvel comics from the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a couple collections of those.
Yeah. Shazam? Is that what? Yeah.
Yeah. And I still can read. They're wonderful, wonderful stories.
I've never read those.
They're great. Yeah. They're like if Roy Crane did a superhero comic.
Oh, okay. Is C.C. Beck? Is that the artist on the?
C.C. Beck, Gardner Fox wrote a lot of them, and they're lighthearted. They're funny. All you have to know is that C.C. Beck modeled Captain Marvel on was it Fred McMurray or someone like that. It was they're just enormously likable.
Yeah.
Really enjoyable comics that don't take themselves at all seriously. A lot of the time they're self-parody of the whole genre. They're just delightful.
So you were taking that information from just liking those comics, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I got to write Batgirl. You're like,
yeah, I thought Batgirl. The only Batgirl that I knew was from the 1966 TV show.
Oh shit!
And I thought this will be really fun.
Yeah.
And little did I know that, because in The Killing Joke, that Batgirl got shot by the Joker, and so now she's in a wheelchair and she's turned into Oracle, and she does computer stuff because people in wheelchairs are really good with computers. And
yeah.
And the new Batgirl was this girl who couldn't really talk and had been brutally abused by her father and wears basically a bondage outfit with a gimp mask.
Yeah.
It was so creepy. And I thought, what have I got into?
So they give you that information? Like they go, here's what you're going to write. This is the character. Like she doesn't really speak. She's wearing this costume. They
just sent me a bunch of, I was on the comps list. So anyways, because I was writing the Vertigo book. So I was getting all the comps every month. So I had like a year's worth of DC, worth of Batgirl in those. I sort of went back and dug through and read them and thought, Jesus. But also I think they sent me a bunch of photocopied issues or something. But I remember saying to the editor, can you send me the Bible? Assuming that it was like TV shows where they would have like a Bible with all the information you needed to know.
Oh, no.
And he just laughed and said, yeah, no, we don't have... It's like we just assume that the writers are all fanboys that know this shit. And the exchange rate back then was brilliant. Like the New Zealand dollar was
sure.
So little. Now suddenly I was earning a lot of money just writing one monthly comic. I just got really depressed, and Atlas kind of ground to a halt, and I was tying myself in knots with that, trying to work out how the story should go.
Why did it grind to a halt?
I think it just I was overthinking everything. I think that the DC experience just turned me inside out a bit, and that meant that I lost any faith in my own stories as well. I even went through a kind of crisis of faith in stories, full stop. I felt like, what is the point of stories? They're just lies. I mean, we're just lying with stories.
Wow.
Pretend stories tell us that the world has meaning and that our lives have meaning and that things unfold according to sort of elegant, meaningful patterns. And whereas actually I felt like, no, the universe is just callous and doesn't give a shit, and things happen. They just happen.
So I'm curious if that was like if doing Atlas at the same time you were doing the DC stuff, did that help the Drawn and Quarterly comic? Did that help Atlas? Did it help the sales because people recognize your name from the mainstream work, or there's like no crossover there really?
I don't know. I really don't know. I suspect there was very little crossover.
Yeah.
It seemed like such different worlds in terms of the readership.
Well, you know, it was a really helpful strip for me when I was first kind of going out in this world as a cartoonist was Joe Matt's strip, How to Live Cheaply. It's in a peep show. That was a really helpful comic for me. I was like, oh, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
There was a really funny one in there too that was called How to Take a Shit Quietly. Strip. Do you remember that one? Because he was always living in like boarding houses and stuff.
Yeah, but this is the guy who kept 20 pea jars under his bed as well. And I don't know. This was entirely a pragmatic choice.
I think I heard that he's working on a new book. You know.
Oh God, I hope so.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
I would be really excited about a new Joe Matt book.
I hope
The lecture I did the other day for the students on process was partly about Chester Brown, because I showed his post-it note process, how he writes using post-it notes, one post-it note per panel. And
do you sit down and write at a computer, or how do you?
My comics, no. I did the DC ones. I did at the computer. Well, I'd start out in my notebook, and I'd often do thumbnails and stuff, and then I would write a script.
Oh wow!
But my own stuff, I just write in my notebook. In fact, this is what I just did a lecture about, precisely this. And so this is what the script looks like for Hicksville.
Oh, wow!
So I do a full script, and then I do little thumbnails like that. Can you see that? So that's how I do the layouts.
Amazing. So when you look at that page of little thumbnails, you know what characters those are? Like,
yeah.
You go, oh yeah, like.
Because I do this, I write the script.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is showing up.
Oh, I can see it.
I write the script, and then I break it down into panels, and I number the panels, and then I do a little diagram of how I'll arrange the panels on the page. Oh. But then I haven't got it handy, but then maybe I have. Hang on. Then I do roughs, and these are roughs from Hicksville.
Oh my God!
So that's this from the Stars chapter.
Yeah, that's pretty close to how I write my comics. Is like that.
I was going to ask you about that, because it seems to me like that's the chapter part 2 of Stars. That's the rough for the.
Yeah, that's pretty detailed though.
Yeah, but then I make a lot of changes. So once the thing about the point of the roughs is that I can then sit down and read it as a comic.
Yeah.
And discover what does work and what doesn't work, and what panels I can drop, and where I need to add a panel because it's not clear and stuff like that.
Did you draw a comic page today or not?
Today?
Yeah.
When did I last draw a comic page? November last year?
What? Come on, Dylan.
I know.
This is the page I drew today. This is for my Joseph Smith book.
You see, man, the thing is, John told me about how, you and he would be going on a drive, and you'd stop at a petrol station and get gas, and while the car was stopped, you'd be leaning on the bonnet of the car with your sketchbook drawing a page. Oh, yeah. I wish I was like that. I'm really, really, I'm the opposite of prolific. I'm writing at the moment. I'm writing a lot of stuff, and I'll show you. I've been writing recently like this instead.
Oh, okay.
So I'm writing with thumbnails.
Yeah.
So I draw the thumbnail first, and then I write the script or write the dialogue or
Oh,
whatever.
really? That's weird. What?
And
How do you do that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
it just means that I'm thinking visually rather than.
Yeah.
I mean, I always used to when I was writing scripts, I was always thinking visually anyway. But I would always write the dialogue first, and I still do. Like if there's a long conversation, I'll write the whole conversation out.
Okay.
And then structure the panels that way. But what I'm finding is doing it this way, I get a lot more scenes that are driven really by the pictures. So I'm experimenting with that as a different way of doing it.
So this is the notebook that I've been using to write a lot of the Joseph Smith stuff. So like it'll look kind of like this. It's super, just like super loose, you know. And a lot of the notes in here are just like historical, just like historical notes on specific events and characters and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really like that's about as detailed as like a thumbnail page will be, you know.
But are you thinking about the layout of the page while you're doing that? You're not just going panel by panel.
No, I mean kind of, but you know, like it's basically like an 8-panel grid for like almost every page. So it's just basically like a movie where it's just each panel as a. I'm not really thinking about like how like the entire page is going to look. I'm just, you know, telling a story, each panel progressing along and stuff, you know. I don't know.
That's how I like to work. Like I'm always admiring the way Chester just thinks of one panel at a time.
Oh yeah.
And he draws the panels on separate pieces of paper.
Yeah.
And then he puts them together at the end. And I kind of love that because it just takes away a whole nother thing to think about. You don't have to worry about trying to do a layout.
You can edit it like a movie, you know.
Yeah,
like
that's
how
that shot out.
Well, I just did a conversation with Zach Sally, and that's how he was working on. He had a whole book that he was almost finished with about. It was a biography of Philip K. Dick.
This Philip K. Dick book, yeah.
He could not find anybody to publish it.
You're kidding.
So he just abandoned it. So, but he had it all. He has like a giant stack of pages, and he was doing them a panel on each page, and then he would like put, you know, scan it in and lay it out that way so that he can move things around and change text and things like that.
Didn't someone else? I think someone else came out with a graphic biography of Philip K. Dick, which I'll bet was nowhere near as interesting. I mean, I haven't read it.
Yeah, no, I don't think.
Yeah,
Zach Sally's is going to be way more interesting.
Yeah.
And I think his was more internal than I'm sure the other one was. You know.
Yeah.
And so that's the value of it, But
you know, the thing that I fantasize about, my dream as a cartoonist would be to work like the old newspaper strip guys, like Frank King or someone, or Charles Schultz. You know, it's like you just plod. You're just slowly plodding along, doing strip after strip after strip, and you've got quite a rigid format you have to stick to, and you don't have to think about how you're going to structure it or lay it out, and you're not having to plan huge elaborate arcs, and you're not thinking, but you just plod day after day. You just keep drawing them, and it accumulates and it turns into something substantial over time. But the idea of sitting down at my drawing board every day and just thinking, all right, I just have to draw 3 panels, you know, it would be so I feel like that would be my happy place. But instead I get overwrought. You know, I construct enormously. I'm always injecting complications for myself that that kind of derail me. So yeah, I must find a way to do that.
If you were offered a newspaper strip, like if they were like, hey, we want you to take over Snuffy Smith, like, would you do it or not? You know? And it's like a paycheck. It's, you know.
No, I wouldn't now. No.
You wouldn't now?
No, I wouldn't now. The thing is, I'm really happy with my university teaching job. I love it. I love the teaching. I find the students incredibly inspiring, and it's a steady, very safe fortnightly paycheck. After freelancing for most of my life, I'm in my 50s now, and I just feel like actually I just want a good. And the thing about the university teaching gig is that it's assumed that you spend nearly half your time on your research, which in my case is drawing comics.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm getting paid to draw comics, and I can draw whatever comics I want. I don't have to think about whether it's going to sell. I don't have to. I feel like when I was doing comics before, and that was all I was doing, my income depended on it. My sense of self-worth depended on it. My some kind of vague, twisted idea of reputation rested on it. There was just so much riding on it, and it puts a lot of pressure on the act of sitting down to write and draw a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's quite liberating to take away most of that. And now when I sit down to do my comics, it's just, this is the comic I want to do.
Yeah.
It's like when I was 18 again.
That's the dream. I mean, I remember that when I had a day job, and then I would come home, and all I had to do was like a new story for the new issue of Blammo, and it could just be whatever I wanted to do, And it was like, I missed that. That was really fun, just being like, what do I want to draw?
Yeah, there's some good things about a day job,
yeah.
but of course, it's exhausting and grueling and takes up all your time. But I am working on stuff. I'm working on a bunch of stuff. But a lot of my comics at the moment are about role-playing games. They're about Dungeons and Dragons. And,
Is it going to be like that movie, Dungeons and Dragons, or what was it called? Or like Monsters and Mazes? Did you ever see that?
Monsters and Mazes with Tom Hanks.
Yeah, it's not going to be your graphic novel.
That's my template for this. In fact, did I send you this? I can't remember. Hang on.
Yeah. Your Jack Chick track?
Yeah.
Yeah. I got one.
So I'm just doing that for fun. That really is just a side thing for fun. So
how many did you do?
I've done 2.
Okay.
That's the second one. Have you got the second one?
I don't think so.
Oh, I'll send you that. Well, when I can, when the post office is open again.
Yeah, right. Wow.
But it's sort of a collective choose your own adventure game. So at the end of each issue, people vote on what the character will do next. But the most fun thing about this was recreating the format of the Chick track as closely as I could. I tried to get really accurate. And the thing that was the most satisfying is their incredibly ugly lettering.
Oh yeah.
It's such terrible ugly. It's Arial, 9-point Arial.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really.
You found a printer and you just said, I want it to look like a Jack Chick track, and they were like, okay.
No, I spent like 3 weeks. I scanned an actual Chick track.
Oh, okay.
Put it into InDesign, and then over the top of it recreated each panel.
Oh my God.
I just wanted to work out how they did the lettering exactly, including the kerning and the leading and everything. I just wanted to recreate the look of it as closely as I could. So I used that as just a way of learning how they do it, and then I went away and did my one. Same font and the same layout.
Amazing.
That was so much fun.
All right, thank you so much for chatting with me. I appreciate it. It's like almost it's an hour and 45 minutes basically, so that's pretty amazing.
What is it, like midnight there or something there?
It's only 8 o'clock.
Oh, it's all right.